So I'm Julie Goldman, Research Data Services Librarian at Countway Library. And today I am also joined by Scott Lapinski and Iris Zhang from the Publishing and Data Services team at Countway Library. And we offer a variety of scholarly communication support, which Scott and Iris will be talking more about today. So I'm going to turn it over to Iris and Scott to talk about increasing your research impact. Thanks, Iris.
Sorry, I thought I was already unmuted. I apologize for that. I'm going to talk very briefly today with you about increasing your research impact. And so some of the things that we will cover are citation counts and impact metrics, new forms of scholarly publishing, and managing your professional identity with ORCID. Okay, so why don't we just jump right into it? When we think about research impact, oftentimes the classic metric that we are talking about really are citation counts, right? And citation-based metrics. And one of the places that you can go to get a sense of how often your work is being cited is the database Web of Science. To find your publications citation count, all you really have to do is go to the basic search page, type in the title of an article that you would like to see the citation count for, and then hit search. And once you do that, you will pull it up in your search results. If you click on the title, you will see, this article, Pathogens and Host Immunity in the Ancient Human Oral Cavity, has been cited within the Web of Science core collection in the citation network. It has been cited 157 times. If you click on that 157, you can actually see all of the citing publications in a big list, and you can play around with it a little bit. You'll see in the big list of authors, though, that one in particular is being featured right there, and that would be Toshihisa Kawai. And so one thing you can do, instead of just looking up an individual article and seeing that one article citation count, is you can search a little more systematically by author name. So why don't we go ahead and do that? So if we are looking for, not just one article by this author, we can search for the author's name, and we can pull up a list of their publications. And once you have your results list pulled up in Web of Science, you'll see over in the upper corner, there is that link that says Create Citation Report. If you do that, you can just get a sense of what is going on. You can see when your publications are being cited, how often. You can have Web of Science calculate your H-index for you, which is another one of those citation-based metrics that can be, really helpful or informative in terms of, discussing how your research has been impactful. And you can break things down a little further, and you can kind of play around with the visualizations and see all sorts of different things. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, calculating that H-index. So in Web of Science, you can do an author search, right? So let's see what Web of Science has that has been authored by our friend, Dr. P. Conran. So we're gonna just go to the basic search, select author for the field that we are searching within, and then we're gonna say Conran P. And that pulls up 80 different results. If you take a look at the, by line on these first two results in our list, they are by someone named Conran or Pierce Conran. And technically speaking, that is P. Conran. That is not actually the person that we are looking for, though. And so this is something that happens, right? You can't just mark all of those things to calculate your H-index, because you should not be including someone's publications in your own report that, you know, are not authored by you. And so what we can do is we can try searching more specifically for our friend Dr. P. Conran by searching using Dr. Conran's full first name. And so we go back to the basic search and we change it from Conran, P to Conran, Philip, and see if that gets us anything better. And well, we got one that didn't turn up in that other list. But you'll also notice that there's a little checkbox by the number, and that was true in the other slide as well. And so one thing you can do is you can actually go ahead and check all the boxes that are appropriate that, you know, our friend Dr. Conran has actually co-authored. And then once we've checked all the boxes next to his actual co-authored papers, we can click on that add to marked list above the list of search results. And then from there, we can generate a citation report and see Dr. Conran's H-index. So it's a little more involved than just searching for the author's name, right? We have to think about versions of names and how the name appears in different publications, right? Even searching the two different ways that we've tried so far, Conran, P and Conran, Philip, might not have actually returned us everything, right? You got to think about, does Dr. Conran have a middle name or a middle initial that, you know, might appear in some of those publications? You know, are those things that we should add to this author search? Is there another initial we should add in? If you don't, you know, also search using these different variations of the name of this author's name, there's a chance that you will actually end up missing out on some of their publications, and then their H-index will look lower than it possibly should. Okay, so actually, coming back to this slide right here, right underneath the search box where we typed in the name, you see that option select from index. So that's something that we can click on and, you know, try to simplify this attempt to capture all the different variations on Dr. Conran's name. And so when we click on that, you can, you know, type in Conran, P again, and you'll see a range of different names that start with the last name Conran and start with the initial P. So we see Conran P, Conran PB, Conran PC. And so just so you know, Conran PB or PB Conran, that is also our Dr. Conran, our friend that we are looking to calculate the H-index for. And so you can go ahead and click on that add next to Conran PB and any other variation that, you know, looks like it is our friend Dr. Conran. And they will combine all of those things together. And then from here, you'll see a list, a more accurate author list of publications that have been co-authored by our friend Dr. Conran. And so we have added those to our marked list. And then from there, when we click on Create Citation Report, we should have something a little more accurate than what we would have otherwise gotten. Okay, so now that we've done all of those steps and made sure that we have considered every different variation of our friend Dr. Conran's name, we clicked on Create Citation Report, and here we have this screen, and we see that Web of Science has calculated Dr. Conran's H-index as 10. And we feel pretty good that, you know, we have included all of Dr. Conran's publications, and we have not included anything that, you know, might have appeared to possibly be our friend Dr. Conran, but is actually a different Dr. Conran. Okay, I just really quickly wanted to mention also that Web of Science isn't the only place where you can go to calculate an H-index. That is something that Google Scholar will also do for you. And so to get there, you just type in scholar.google.com, it'll take you there, and then you can just, you can log in if you already have an account, or you can actually just search for your name. And then once you do that, you will be taken to your author profile. If you look over to the right side of the list of publications, you will see that Google Scholar also calculates for you your H-index. One thing to keep in mind if you're looking at the difference between what Web of Science says your H-index is and what Google Scholar says your H-index is that those numbers will be different from each other, and it is extremely likely that the Google Scholar H-index will be higher than the Web of Science H-index, and when it comes down to it, that's actually not a problem at all. It just is a matter of what they are, you know, considering or counting as a citation. So Web of Science is pretty picky in particular about where they will consider where your citations are coming from. And Google Scholar is less selective when it comes down to it. So that's kind of why those two H-index numbers will differ from each other. Okay, so we talked about the kind of traditional citation-based metrics. And I just wanted to point out that, you know, those are useful. They don't give you a real clear picture of a lot of things because when it comes down to it, you know, citations and being cited in other people's works are not the only form of attention that exist. And so if you wanted to get a different kind of view of the impact that your research might be having, altmetrics are one way of getting a better sense of that or getting a view of that. And so I wanted to point your attention to this bookmarklet for researchers put out by Altmetric. It's a free tool. You can just download it and add it. And it's really, really neat. And it shows you things that you will not see just through looking at citation counts. Okay, so once you add the bookmarklet, you will start to see this little like colorful circle thing. It's also referred to as the Altmetric Donut. And so here we have an article pulled up in Web of Science, and you can see that it includes now the Altmetric Donut for this article. And it's talking about things like social networks, like 8 tweets and 1 Facebook mention. And so what Altmetrics does is it kind of gives you a measure of the attention that your scholarship is attracting in various other venues other than, you know, scholarly publications. So, you know, are people talking about your works on Twitter? Are they blogging about it? Are you getting Facebook mentions? In Mendeley, are people, you know, doing anything with your recent publications? So Altmetrics is a nice way of supplementing, I think, you know, what you can see about your work through those citation counts. It gives you, you know, a different way of considering what impact might look like or what it might mean. You know, Altmetrics also capture things like if your scholarship is being mentioned in the media, in the news, and things like that. So it's really neat. It's just, you know, it kind of adds on to what you can learn about your scholarship's impact through those citation counts. Okay. And so if, you know, let's see, if we go back, you'll see there's the option toward the bottom of that little box. Click here for more details. And if you do click there, you will actually be taken to this page right here. And you'll get to kind of do a little deeper dive into what that Altmetric Donut graphic is telling you about the attention that your scholarship is attracting. And so you'll kind of see, you know, where in the world are people talking about your work. And so it's kind of just nice. It gives you a different kind of view of how your research is impacting or making its impact, you know, and you can also just beyond just the world of scholarly publications, you know, how else are people talking about it and where and through what means? Okay. In Pubmed even, you'll see the Altmetric Donut and you can So the bookmarklet is pretty neat. It just, gives you additional pieces of information about what kinds of impact your work might be having out there in the world. Because, referenced in one Wikipedia page, for example, a classic citation count would never, ever reveal that for you. Okay. So I'm going to now hand it off to Scott so he can talk some more about altmetrics and proceed with what we've been talking about so far.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm going to just share my PowerPoint slide stack and pick up where Iris left off. So bear with me 2 seconds. And as we've been looking at some of the first half of this presentation, we've seen places where you can get the traditional citation counts on your scholarship, where you can also find some of the altmetric counts, whether it's mentions in the media or some other type of social media. But how can you actually increase that? How can you actually find ways to improve your citation count in either of these formats, whether it's in the published literature or in online mentions? And it really comes down to sharing that scholarship. 2 things, which I'm going to try and cover in the next 10 minutes anyway, are other ways to share your scholarship and other ways to deal with that issue of these multiple versions of an author's name. So if we think of yourself as an author for a moment, you're going to try to you will end up discovering that your name is going to be indexed in several different ways in these different databases. And it's important to try and think about how to bring that all together and how to bring together all of your scholarship into one list that you can run a bibliometrics impact measure on. So how do you share your scholarship? So first, I want to talk a little bit about repositories. So what we're looking at here, for those of you who are in the Harvard community, we have an institutional repository where you can share your scholarship. So it may be an article that you had accepted for publication. Many of the publishers allow you to share the post-print version of that article. And what that means is you might not be able to share that published version of the article, but just before the manuscript was formatted by the editors at a given journal, that version of your manuscript that was accepted by the peer reviewers, that is what's called a post-print. And you're allowed to share that in many different repositories like the Harvard repository. Maybe you have to wait after about 6 months before that article is published, but either way, there are many, many venues where you can share post-prints of your published literature. And when they're in these venues, they get picked up by Google Scholar, they get picked up through other mechanisms where those who do not have access to the published version of your article, they may be able to access this open access version, which is in one of these types of repositories. Pubmed Central is another such repository where a lot of freely available manuscripts are shared, even though the published version of that article might be locked behind some subscription license. So data repositories are very similar. I'll talk about that in a second, but this is a manuscript repository. Again, for anybody who is affiliated with Harvard, I encourage you to think about sharing your scholarship here. These metrics are then dependent on these different repositories. So here I was looking at several of the articles that were deposited into the Harvard system recently. This particular paper, I believe, was on COVID at the time. And you can see how many people have downloaded either the paper or, in this example here, we're looking at how many downloads came from the actual repository over a period of time. You can look at the particular authors independently. So again, if you have deposited to an institutional repository, you should be able to see the metrics on your own scholarship, how many articles are in there by you, how many articles have been downloaded, where the countries are. So that's a post-print example, the Harvard repository. Preprints are a little bit different. Preprints would be the manuscript that you might have written very recently, but it has not yet been submitted to a journal for peer review. So preprint servers like bioRxiv and medRxiv are extremely heavily used right now with the COVID pandemic. Many, many researchers around the world are sharing their scholarship here. And there is some checks and balances. We can't just willy-nilly upload whatever we're writing and hope that it appears in one of these preprint servers. There is some scrutiny, but it's not a peer review process in the same tradition of a journal prior to publication. So these have not been peer reviewed in that traditional way. They're preprints, and when we upload a manuscript to this type of repository, the benefit is the science gets out there immediately. It has an immediate impact. It's incredibly timely. Some of the research is instantly commented on. Some of the research has been picked up in the media. I'm sure over the last 6 months, a lot of people have been hearing things about reports on the news where they say this article has not yet been peer reviewed. However, the authors and some of the screening which has gone on in the commentary sections of these preprint repositories, it's already making an impact, and sometimes a very large impact. So these are preprint repositories where I encourage any of you who are able to do so, consider sharing some of your scholarship. There are publishers who also screen these preprint repositories to look for articles which might fit within upcoming issues that they're planning to publish in the traditional published literature. So again, this is just an example of bioRxiv and medRxiv. If we dig down a little bit deeper to a particular record in there, you can start to see that there is also the altmetrics are going to be in here. There's a little tab over here towards the center of this record which says metrics. When one clicks on that, it tells us how many people have already picked this up. And so again, even though this is a preprint, I can already see that 12 news outlets have picked up on this article, and there is some commentary and discussion that is already going around this particular science. And this is already having an impact on other potential research which is happening in the area. And so again, as Iris showed, we can click on that little donut that you see down there in the lower left, 447. I click on that, it takes me to the Altmetric record of this. And so now if I'm curious to learn a little bit more about what's happening with this preprint, I can figure out what CNN might have been saying about it, what some of these other news agencies were saying about it. I could dig down a little bit deeper. I mean, Twitter and some of the blogging agencies out there are not always frivolous. There are quite a few feeds which are hosted by major NGOs and think tanks, which might be interesting to see what they're having to say or why they did choose to retweet some of these preprints. So they certainly have a large value and a place where your scholarship can get more exposure. Also, the preprint repositories that I just mentioned, bioRxiv and medRxiv, if any of the work that you're doing is being supported by the NIH and maybe other public agencies, I'm not too sure, but the NIH, absolutely. If you have a preprint that you put into bioRxiv or medRxiv and NIH funding has helped support that research, that disclosure will end up having your preprint indexed in Pubmed. So here is an amazing opportunity to get more exposure to your research, because this Pubmed index of somebody searching on the most recent COVID publications, even though that was a preprint, it has been picked up in Pubmed and will be discoverable to those who are trying to see what is some of the cutting edge of the most recent research in that particular topic. So that is true only for COVID research, COVID-19 research, and those papers that have been supported with NIH funding. And I think the logic there is that the scientists who have been granted this award and the research and the team that is working on these incredibly important issues, even though it's not peer reviewed, indeed, it has a great deal of academic merit. And so again, just another quick example here of a quick search in Pubmed. The result list here is a few things that were in medRxiv, except for the third one down there at the bottom. But what I wanted to do here was also show sharing data is equally important in gaining greater exposure to your research and, of course, increasing the impact of that research. So I just did this quick search to show which of these open access articles have some associated data. And I followed the clickstream down one of those citations, and I discovered that there was a large amount of information at clinicaltrials.gov for one of those particular papers, where I could learn more about the protocol and any other types of scholarly objects which might be shared in other repositories that are related to that data, related to that article. And sharing your data whenever possible in these public repositories, sharing your protocol in different protocol repositories. Clinical trials is obviously a requirement for a lot of the clinical research, but you also have some other opportunities to share protocols. One tool is called protocols.io. And although I don't have a screenshot of that, that is, again, is another place to bring exposure to the research and the work you're doing. And not only that, but also put a claim in the ground to show exactly what you're doing, so that your idea is somehow documented in this tangible form in one of these repositories, where once something is documented in a tangible form, then your claim on copyright over that presentation of those ideas then becomes more absolute. So Dataverse is a data repository, open again to anyone who hopes to share some data. And there's also different levels of sharing. So if you have a team that you're working on and you're not ready to share that data publicly yet, you can use this as a space to have some data as kind of a working project at any given time. And then when you go for publication, and let's say the publisher says you must share the data which is relevant to this manuscript you're having under review, you will have a universal, a URI, a specific identifier which can link back to the data which is publicly shared in Dataverse. And making that data available, linking that back to the document, whether it's in a preprint server, a post-print server, or a publication, is again going to make your research far more visible and have greater impact with those scholars that are working in that same space. The National Library of Medicine, NCBI, the NIH, of course, they have multiple research data repositories. And again, this is just a submission page. I should have probably taken a couple of other screenshots so you can see the different types of data repositories which are here. But again, I think a simple Google on the NIH data submission or data.gov will get you to some of this more information. So in the tiny little bit of information I have to go over, tiny bit of time I have to go over ORCID, let me first just say that tomorrow at 1 o'clock, I will be doing a much deeper dive into ORCID, setting up a unique author profile so that you can bring together all of the scholarship that you've produced into one ORCID record. And that ORCID will then become this unique identifier which can be searched in databases like the Web of Science that Iris showed us at the beginning, so that you don't have to do so many different variations of an author's name to try and find, is it P. Conran, P.B. Conran, Philip Conran? By searching just on the author ORCID, you will then be able to aggregate all of the publications and scholarship that are around that particular person. So in a really quick overview of some of the ORCID screens, orchid.org is where you will want to go if you have not yet set up an ORCID. I encourage you to do so. It will only take a few minutes. You can slowly populate all of the different fields and sections of ORCID over time. But if you haven't created an ORCID record yet, you may as well do one now or as soon as you have a few moments, because they will become required at some point, whether you're submitting something to a manuscript to a publisher, or you're applying for a grant, or even if you are a postdoc on a particular project which is being funded by the NIH, there are many T32s and R01s and a variety of different grant awards which require all of the participants to have an ORCID profile. So setting these up, again, is really quick and easy. As you dig down deeper into ORCID, you can start to add more details, as in the history of your employment, as you can see there at the top of the screen. You can also then start to add your works. And there is a multiple way that they define what works are. It could be publications, it could be preprints, it could be conference presentations. There's a long list of things which it's very flexible is what I'm trying to say. It's very flexible in what you may choose to put here to show some scholarly contribution. And so that's what the C is in ORCID. So it's this researcher and contributor ID. So whatever the scholarly contribution is, you have an opportunity to put it into this list. You can also import citations from somewhere else. So there's a variety of different ways to add works to ORCID. So you don't have to manually type in all of these publications as I have them in my list. You could upload an export from, let's say, EndNote or Zotero. You can upload the entire bibliography and it will populate here. And there's a number of other ways, which I can go over in more detail for those of you that can attend tomorrow. And this all will come full circle when you have to create a Biosketch or a progress report on some NIH grant application. And I know that is definitely important for a lot of the folks on the Harvard campus. This ORCID profile that you create interfaces with many other tools. And I'm only showing the Science CV integration right here. But when you have to create a Biosketch for a particular grant application, by integrating your ORCID record with this Science CV tool at the NIH, it will allow the ORCID information to automatically populate this required form that the NIH, and as you can see here, the NSF, will require at some point for those of you that will be applying for grant funds. So here I'm creating a new Biosketch, and I'm telling Science CV, please use my ORCID profile to pre-populate many of these required elements in the form. What's also really nice about it is all of the scholarship that I have added to my ORCID record will automatically map to this Science CV form. So you can see there's a little ORCID tab right there. By clicking on that ORCID tab within the Science CV form, all of the scholarship that I had added to that ORCID record one time is available for me directly right here. So I don't have to go search for it again. I don't have to go search through all those author permutations of my name. That work has already been done once, permanently saved in ORCID, and then I can use it in all these other tools that require me to either run a new H-index or find all my literature for a Biosketch or a bibliography or some grant progress report, whatever it might be. ORCID is the one-stop shop to manage all of my publications, all of my scholarly activity, all of the versions of my name, so that I can make my work easier downstream when I get into these types of tools. And here's just an example of what the Biosketch has done. It kind of formatted in the required style that the NIH would expect, and that personal statement, citations, further down, those contributions to science, way down at the bottom of this page, those citations were pulled in directly from my ORCID record, and I did not have to manually, tediously type them in a second time. So I know that we went through this pretty quickly, half hour. I am not sure what the plan is for questions, Julie, but I'll turn it back to you. And if anybody wants to email Iris or myself, we are certainly happy to entertain questions.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much, Scott and Iris. If you have any questions at this point, you can put them into the chat. And I want to thank you all for joining today. Again, the recording and the slides will be made available and posted on our data management website. And we would appreciate any feedback you have on today's session. So please fill out the survey at the link provided on the slide.